Hello, hello.
Hey, Lucky. How's it going today?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Doing all right. Oh, we kept Josh up late.
I was up very late.
This is why you need the midday nap.
I took one.
Brandon, I just fixed those typos in the minutes that I don't know if you saw my call out.
Yep, I gave you a looks good to me on it.
Okay, I'll go ahead and merge it after this call. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
It worked quite nicely just copying and pasting, except I didn't reread the whole thing. I realize now that there was a bunch of typos, including this misspelling of your name. So I apologize.
It's fun when it's got a couple different spellings that different people know from whoever they've met in their past. And so I think back to the days when I would sit next to someone that was a Brendan in high school, and no matter what the teacher said, we would intentionally sit right next to each other. No matter which one the teacher said that day, we're like, "You mix us up again." Drove them nuts.
Shall we kick it off?
I think
All
so.
right.
Josh,
Yeah. Okay. Ready, Josh? Got your camo gear?
I'm
You
ready.
look, you look about as ready as you can be. Excellent. Okay. Okay. So I'm happy to chair unless anybody else would like to do it. Please speak now or forever hold your peace.
you do such a good job. Go for it.
I kind of feel for everybody having to suffer through my nasally Australian accent every week. So if anybody else would like to do it, I reserve no ego to have to do this. Okay, hello and welcome everybody to the Working Group Ref Types in OCI. Today is Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022. It's lovely to see all your faces. Just a friendly reminder that we are under the OCI Code of Conduct, and it states, please be lovely to each other. This will be recorded and posted to YouTube after the fact. So if you're catching us from the recording, hello and welcome. Today we have a full agenda. I will ask that anybody in the audience today, please add your name as to the attendees list in the HackMD. That would be very fantastic. So thanks for doing that. We already have a note taker. Brandon Mitchell has signed up. Thank you very much, Brandon. You get the emoji gold medal for today. We appreciate that. And we do go ahead and check all these minutes into the GitHub repository, which is great progress. Excellent. So with that, I will get into the agenda from top down order. We have first up, review proposal B with Josh. I pass you the virtual mic, Josh.
All right.
We see your screen.
Excellent. So here's the proposal in the chat if you want to follow along there. And this can be found on the main branch of the working group repo. So this proposal was originated by Dan, my new boss here at ChainGuard. And this was back in just over a year ago. So I have taken the liberty of putting together, trying to simplify what he's put here into proposal. But just to be clear, this is this is not mine, and he was unable to make it today. So we may need to, if I can't answer certain questions, put together a log of things to answer about it. But very simply, primarily this proposal introduces a new field on all of the image spec, on all of the image spec defined JSON schemas. And there's a link here for a PR that Dan had put together. And you can see, like, on the Go level for descriptor and index and manifest, we're just adding a reference, which is itself a descriptor. And what that allows you to do is to sort of after the fact point to something that's already in the registry. This proposal does not say the thing needs to be there or not, and that could be kind of like a garbage collection discussion or up to the registry. But in this example, we have a scoop of vanilla ice cream that we're saying this is part of this ice cream cone, which is A1, A1, A1. And that's pretty much it for the schema changes. It's not, there's no new manifest or there's no new additional schema. It's just adding this one new optional field. And then in order to do the actual like querying after the fact, adding a slash references dangling off of the manifest to a given reference, either tag or digest. And this it's really just an array of descriptors, and this itself is a valid image spec index with really just the manifests field filled out here, which is the only, like, if you look at this Go, it's the only required piece. So it's really just returning an index. And so, for example, let's say you have an ice cream cone, to use Nisha's example of Neapolitan. I want to get basically everything that comprises a Neapolitan ice cream cone, and this would return to me that vanilla scoop that we referenced in the with that reference field earlier, as well as chocolate and strawberry, which happened at another time. That's basically it. There's no additional details right now regarding filtering or pagination. This would just give you the full list of references, and that's pretty much it. Nisha had put together last year this nice diagram. And here's, for example, this middle one is kind of step one where you're pushing an image. And then later on, you might push an SBOM. And here's that reference to that original image. And here's this purple one is a example of a signature. So pretty straightforward in my view. Yeah, that's it. That's all I have for you.
Cool. I was starting to throw my own questions over in the minutes, knowing that I would ask them. The first one I'm going to throw out there is knowing the looping discussion we had. And the quick summary from talking about this with the rest of the OCI group last week was that there is a potential that we could run into registries that have issues with some of the looping. And so as a result, adding the reference type onto the index would be a challenge, would not be good. I'll phrase it that way. You don't want to be able to, yeah, go ahead.
You're saying nix this piece.
nix that one. I would also probably nix it on the descriptor itself, unless we actually have a need to have it on the descriptor. But on the image manifest itself, it makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay. Yeah, I was chatting with Dan about this, and he used the term terminal terminal reference where like whereby there wouldn't be a way to reference out of it. So that would be an index, a terminal reference. Okay, noted.
Yeah, it's if you ever have an object that has children that could also be pointed to by the reference type itself, that's where we get funny loops. And so because an image doesn't have children that are other manifest, if you have a reference that can only be a manifest, you've prevented that issue. So that was one of them I was thinking of. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and that image that you put up last week is a description of this problem.
Yes.
Okay, I'll find that somehow and share this.
Yeah, I've been chatting a little bit with Dan on the side too on this stuff. I think we're all looking toward the same direction, hopefully. Steve, you got your hand up. I've got other questions, but go ahead and take it since I haven't been good with my hand.
No, go. I was just queuing up for the next finish your questions.
Okay, so the other one I was thinking of is, do we want to consider whether reference should be a list rather than just a single descriptor? Are there potential use cases out there where you might have more than one thing that this object references? And I'm thinking about the scenario where you maybe build a multi-platform image and you've got one SBOM you've generated for all the platforms you just built. Should you be able to have that same SBOM refer back to all the different various digests of the different platforms and the index and whatnot?
I think that's a good question. I think John. I think John actually suggested this, and I'm not really sure what the conclusion was, but I don't see why not. You're saying this would be basically an array instead of an object with descriptors inside?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with it. If we say that we don't want to do that, it's not the end of the world, because you can just make multiple of these and point to the same blobs. And so it's still workable, but might be a nice performance improvement there, efficiency.
Okay, yeah, let me write down these things. I don't see a reason why not.
I don't think you need to write them down. I think Brendan is accurately capturing them in the minutes.
Okay.
So you should be able to refer back, Josh.
Yeah,
right.
I'm grabbing minutes, and I'd also turn them in the original pull request. That's actually, I'm looking back through right now as I'm doing this. The other one I was thinking of, when we look at the API, what if someone said get /v2/manifest/manifest/references? I think we've got a condition where, depending on whether you're, what if that reference right there was called manifest? Because depending on what you are, you might be looking for the manifest/manifest repository and finding the tag name reference, or you might be looking for references on the upstream repo. I think we've got a name condition in there.
So perhaps this could be manifest -references or just -references.
I think other APIs I've looked at only go 2 layers. And so they have name / whatever the action is / ref of whatever it is. And so changing manifest to references and then not having a third field in there, might be a better working solution.
Yeah, I think that's going to help a lot of people out, actually.
And then the only last thing I have in here before I turn it over to Steve was pagination. And I know you mentioned that, that was something you were thinking about there.
Yeah, I think the proposal A actually has a lot of great stuff related to that, and I don't see why certain aspects of that, for like wanting to query a certain media type or paginate, change the essence of this API.
Cool. That's all I've got. Steve, I think you were next.
I just had one quick one, Brandon, before you turn it over to Steve. I was reviewing your feedback about, hey, there's too much detail in proposal A. And I suggested, hey, do we want to cut everything below that's not in out, below the south side of the HTTP API stuff, which includes the pagination stuff. So whatever you describe here was, we were preemptively answering a question in the proposal that we knew was going to come up. Do we go pull that out of the proposal, or is it worth staying there? Because it sounds like you're asking Josh something that might be worthwhile in the proposal.
I think where I was going with thinking about yours was we got into a lot of detail in there of here's the RFC to go look up for all these other details. And it got to be very wordy, very quick. And so the good thing that I like about what Josh had done here, and sorry for my throat going out. I think I got a little bit of cracker in my throat. The good thing I like about it is we just really focused on here's the API call, here's the response we're going to see from it, here's the JSON, what it's going to look like. We didn't really get into describing here's every field and the various, this is optional, this is mandatory, this is the other,
Yeah.
the various syntax for every field we've got in here. It was just, here's the data. If it doesn't make sense just looking at it, let's talk about it.
Yeah, that's fine. Steve and I and Sajay, when we were doing it, we either said, hey, you're either solving this by inline comments with the // which is basically defining what the field does if it's not infinitely obvious, or everybody's going to ask a million questions like last week as to what field did, and you have to end up having to type it all out in the notes. So I just said, why don't we just put it there, and then, but hey, we're trying to feel this out. Because I felt like, I think it was niches. Everyone was like, well, what's this field, or what's that field? And is it optional? And is it mandatory? And is it an array? And is it so I just said, well, let's start here, but we could trim it back, which would mean, we could put everything into inline comments, because I was referring to Nisha, and Nisha had a lot of inlines, and yours too, which is, // for every field. And I said, well, figuratively, you're doing exactly the same thing. But that was just, my determination. So happy to peel all that back and make it.
Yeah, that's my own personal opinion. I'm throwing it out there for anybody else though that wants to chime in. If you've had a chance to look at what was been on the PR for Josh, I think you had been one of the people that was looking to try to get this stuff streamlined down. So if I'm out of line on that one, feel free to.
No, I generally agree, and I think one of the things when we put together this template is this links section. If you have like this huge thing on the pagination and filtering, I think maybe in the API section you say we can use these fields and these fields to filter and paginate, but then like actually just link out and keep this document as small as we can, because I think part of the reason why this working group is here is trying to communicate these ideas and not get lost. But it again, like I'm excited that you all put it together, and I think with just a few,
Yeah, it was just finding a balance. I was kind of like, we omit this, and
no, I understand.
We're typing questions, we put it in, it's too long. So I'm happy to,
And I know it does have more features than this proposal, so it's going to be larger, I think. So I trust your judgment on it. I was just kind of hard on like, putting this a short description here, and like so they all like visually.
Yeah, I mean, we tried really hard to do that. So hopefully you can see that effort was put in.
Oh, I saw. It was seen. Any before we move on?
Well, I think it was Steve now. I was kind of just answering
I'm sorry.
what Brandon was saying about pagination, asking the question, and then that led me into, should that be in the template or not? But it doesn't sound like we have a solid answer, and we can kind of just feel it out. But otherwise,
Uh,
Steve was going to ask a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to build on some of the questions. I mean, I think I can't remember where the discussion was because there's been a couple places for this. The reference on blobs rather than manifest is the one that's kind of problematic, and we hadn't really identified what the use case is. If you put a reference on the core descriptor, then basically everything in the registry can be a tangled vine, and there's no way to have any kind of lifecycle management. And this is part of what Brandon was kind of echoing. If you put the reference on the manifest, then you have, if you put the reference on a manifest, and a manifest is what equals an item that has life cycle, then you have a way to manage things. If you put it on blobs, then there's no way to really trace these things through. So that was one of the things, and we couldn't identify a solid use case for it. So that's kind of why we kept the reference up at the manifest. In the artifact one, it's subject, here it's reference. Other than that, they're the same. So I would kind of echo that one. The other one was the reference as a collection. We also went through that one also. We were trying to figure out what they could, because you could always, if it's a collection, you could always say it's a collection of one and use that use case. But when it's a collection, it makes, again, lifecycle kind of really difficult as to figure out what it is you're trying to trace and what you're trying to enable.
Hey, Steve, I'm sorry, I just want to fully understand what you're saying. Are you referring to making this an array?
Correct. Yeah, I'm agreeing that reference should be a single, because as we expanded to try to make it a collection, we couldn't really find a solid use case for it. And it made the lifecycle management also extremely complex to try to manage, because you have one thing that manages down to a graph, and then one thing that manages up to a graph. And we couldn't really find the scenario to, I think Brendan mentioned this as well, Brandon, sorry, that you could point it to an index, and that's the way you could kind of manage if you want to do up. Because even the multi-arc scenario, I really struggled to find a single SBOM that actually is the SBOM you use for multiple architectures. Each architecture would have an SBOM. But if you really wanted to have an SBOM or something on a manifest, on a manifest list, then you can make an SBOM on the manifest list. So you can actually achieve both. So I'll stop there because I see Brandon, did you have a question on that?
Yeah, when you're saying we can point up to an index, I think that still has a challenge where somebody says, give me the SBOM for this individual platform specific image. It's not going to search back to the index to find the SBOM. You're going to have to upload a separate SBOM for every platform. Is that correct?
Fair. Yes. Because by the time you're right, if you put a multi-arc SBOM on the index, the way the container systems work is it asks for the platform specific manifest. And by the time it gets that platform specific manifest, it doesn't necessarily know how to get back to the index. So that kind of reinforces that problem.
Yeah, so you would end up having to just upload multiple of these. Yeah, if there are issues that this causes, I'd have to think through when you're saying, multiple graphs in there.
Yeah.
Then we have an option to work around the other way. So it's not a deal breaker either way.
So just, another +1 for keeping it a single property. Did I hear somebody else?
No, I was just going to say that's what the proposal has. Brandon was saying to convert that to an array of objects, but you're saying keep it the way it is.
Right.
Because of reasons stated. Okay.
And then the next one is, I was kind of curious if you scroll down to your index list with the response of references in the example, I was struggling because I don't know how the media types would actually be vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry, because I believe those are the descriptors of the manifest. So those would all be image manifest. Because I don't understand that one either. That's not really the media type. I don't know what that is.
Because you're saying this is an OCI manifest, right? And so you're basically, okay.
Like I don't know how you got there. The way we did it with the container image manifest is we use the config object to differentiate the artifact types. But what that is there, I believe that's the manifest. So that's one of the existing manifests. Conceptually,
okay, so this should be the OCI. This should probably the OCI image manifest, and then we can do a OCI artifacts type deal with the vanilla. Is that sort of what
Right.
you're?
Yeah, so that's kind of how we got to in proposal A, why the media type is OCI image or OCI artifact, whichever. It's the manifest. And the artifact type is a different property, because that would basically what would
Right.
happen is those media types would all be OCI image or OCI artifact, whichever. In other words, those are the manifest types. And then you want to say this is vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry, and that would be the artifact type property that you see in proposal A.
Okay. Yeah, I guess if these are, if we're saying cut it down to only manifests which can reference, then this field becomes meaningless.
Oh, because you're saying that the blob, basically what you're trying to do is graft a blob media type, because blob media types don't matter per se. Yeah, I think you've interwound the generics of a media type, but where are they applied? So
Right. No, I'm opening up the original proposal to see.
Yeah, even there you're showing the distribution.
Yeah, these are manifests. Okay, that was my mistake. I mean,
We're trying
yeah,
to be
this should
we're trying to be
always
too generic.
Yeah.
If
This
we're
should
only
always
putting
be
references on a
by
manifest, sorry.
No, I'm done.
And then the last one is just like putting anything on the existing image manifest, any schema changes. This is just back to the original problem. Like we can put subject or reference on a manifest technically. The question is, what is the versioning impact of that? If we just jam a property into the manifest, the whole premise, especially when you get to your references API, is the expectation is a registry knows how to index it and put it, and emit it out. If we put any new property name on a manifest, is that a version bump? Is that not a version bump? What is our commitment to versioning? If it just shows up in a registry that doesn't know anything about this, is it expected to persist? Are we expected to are they magically expected to provide the references API? So that's just goes back to, it's really, at the end of the day, the hard work isn't a JSON schema property on a manifest. It's a registry's ability to index the content as it comes in and emit it back on some API, references, referrers, Fred, Barney. So I just don't know what the versioning expectation is for existing registries.
Yeah, and I think just specifically about what am I doing? Specifically about what happens. Is there, I believe there's like something in this spec where it must ignore that, but I guess I don't know what that means.
Yeah, that was an interesting one we discussed also in one of these meetings. Like, must ignore by who? The client? The registry? Like, it was a very not ominous, it was a very vague comment that sounds and feels good, but if you're ignoring anything gets put in it, then what's the expectations? Are there expectations you're going to do something with it? So that is a kind of a nebulous comment. So I'll stop there. I see a bunch of other hands going up.
That's a good point.
I may want to clarify that one at some point and just submit a change to that extensibility page, because my personal read of ignoring it is that if you push a manifest to the registry, because we're maintaining digest, you don't modify it at all. You just don't do anything special with it. It's just a field that you don't know what to do with, and you just pass it through as if you pass through any other byte stream. And if the client doesn't know what to do with it, then the client just ignores it at that point. But that might be something for me to change later on the OCI side. I do really like the idea, though, of modifying the image itself. And the reason is because it gives us a nice backwards compatibility path where we can modify this image media type with an extra field. And registries that don't know what to do with this, as long as they're not filtering these fields that they don't know what to do with, which we've seen that. So that is a possible risk out there. But if they aren't doing that, which is a lot of the registries out there aren't filtering by any unknown fields, we can push this image manifest up to a registry and it will just get accepted as is without any changes. And the reason that's nice is that we can have the same artifact going from a registry that supports new media types to the one that doesn't support it. And for the ones that don't support the new API calls, we could have the digest tags we were looking at before as kind of like the backwards compatible solutions for those. So we have a pattern that works as you're moving these from one registry to another, that you wouldn't have to actually modify the digest of the artifact that we're adding.
To be clear, Brandon, you're talking about the stuff in D then?
Yeah,
Doing
basically
something like this
merging
as
B
a back.
with, yeah, merging this with what you're proposing, and then we have both backward compatible and forward compatible with registries
How
that have
would
new
you-
API.
Okay, but how would you determine, I think like what Steve's saying, correct me, Steve, if I'm wrong, like how would you actually determine that compatibility?
If the API to query a reference doesn't come back, if it 404s or comes back with a answer that you weren't expecting, then you would know to push the digest tags.
But, okay, but I guess I'm just thinking about the workflow. I'm releasing something and I push it up with this reference. And then 2 days later, I go and I try to pull it and it's not there. So you're saying query this / references
As part of your push.
on push?
Yeah, as part of your push, unless you have another way to know whether the registry supports it or not, to do a query on push. And that way, if you see if the registry doesn't support, then you know, okay, I also need to push these tags. And similar, if you're querying a registry to say, give me all the references to this image, if it comes back and says, I don't know what that reference API is you're asking about, then you know to go look for the tags.
Yeah,
Do
I
we-
have to think about it to fully. Go ahead, Lockie.
I was just going to say, do we know that registries don't throw away unknown fields? Is that part of the specification? Because that's data loss.
Yeah, if
Particularly
they
we
threw
can't.
away the field, then it would change the digest, and that should be invalid. And so I'd like to make a PR to the one that we were looking at earlier, to the extensibility page on OCI, just to clarify that.
And
So
it gets uploaded as a document. So we can't technically throw it away. It's just a matter of what do we do with it? What's the expectations of it? That's the challenge. Now you're submitting a JSON document that happens to have a new property in it. We store it off in storage and away it goes.
Oh, so we don't, because I've just seen that be an attack vector in the past. Unknown fields, you just put arbitrary data and blobs and store stuff there and blow up. That's fine in registries.
Well, I don't think it's fine. I actually do agree with the strict schema for versioning. So I don't agree with this concept. But
I was just asking because that's the case for versioning, in my opinion, because, we've tripped over this wire in Kubernetes many times, adding optional fields and not versioning the APIs. And then we get all kinds of pickly problems later because optional additions aren't versioned in Kubernetes. And you get this problem with forward and backward compatibility that is kind of unforeseen. It's just an interest. I was just wondering, can you guarantee that if you put that data there, that descriptor, does every registry persist that data? And if the answer is yes, then it's okay, but otherwise it's data loss.
yeah, because it's data loss, they threw it in the spec that you're not supposed to drop those fields. You're just supposed to pass them through as unknown. And that was for that same purpose of just knowing that you wouldn't know all the fields that are going to come in the future. So just allow them to pass through.
If you think about it, the way the digests work, so we can't actually touch the content of the document that comes in. We get it, we validate it. For instance, a manifest that has the layers collection, those blobs need, well, I'm be careful when I say have to exist because I have to go back and look at the wording of the specs. But basically, the typical scenario is you upload the blobs, then you upload a manifest, and the layers collection references blobs, and if those blobs don't exist, the manifest is rejected. but the document, the manifest itself, is a JSON document that we persist as is, no changes, no white space, no nothing, because the digest would change. The question, though, is if you're sticking properties in it. Well, first of all, if you stick in properties in it, is there an expectation we're supposed to do something with it? Are we supposed to index the subject/reference property because your expectation is you're going to get something out? Are we supposed to not garbage collect something because that subject references something in some graph that you're expecting to be persisted? And then to your size thing, you could push anything you want into it. You could push a video stream into that JSON, and then the only catch there is registries typically wind up implementing some kind of max payload
Size limit.
Yeah, which is even more scary because different registries might have different implementations, so the whole promotion workflows get broken. This is one of my concerns with the data element. So it just goes back to your versioning thing. If you want to do stuff, great, but put it in a version that registries state whether they support that version or not.
Or the behavior is very deterministic based on the existence of that refers API on the HTTP endpoint.
Yeah, I'm just struggling with how you know that besides making a real request. And
I think it's the same thing in proposal A, right? It's like hit the endpoint. Does it exist? That's how you know this registry supports it.
Well,
and
actually,
if it doesn't, everything that
Steve
was saying, yeah, is not expected. If you can't hit that endpoint, don't expect any garbage collection, or this registry doesn't understand references.
So the interesting thing between proposal A and this one, or any of the proposals that make changes to the manifests, is the question of versioning. So proposal A forces versioning because registries must, I want to say must because it sounds like a spec. Registries, when you submit a document to the manifest API for put, it needs to know what those manifest types are. So you can't take the artifact manifest and submit it to Foo's registry if it doesn't know how to parse that manifest type. There's a schema validation. And that's how we're making sure that that registry knows how to index this thing and would return it. So implicitly, the refers API would be there if you understood that manifest type. In this case, if we're adding properties to an existing image, the existing image spec, are we bumping the version? If we bump the version, I don't know what happens to register. I haven't tried this. Like if you say that the manifest media type is a version 1.1 or 1.n or 2.0, I honestly don't know what registries would do if you submitted it to it. And if you don't submit it because we say, oh, we don't want to break registries because we want to jack it into existing registries, is there an expectation that because the property went in that there's an expectation to get it out? So all of this just kind of revolves around versioning.
I think we're comparing two specifications, focusing on Josh's specification primarily. The point I think we haven't touched upon is we keep speaking about versioning and we kind of like defer to image versioning. The image spec has a version, the registry distribution also has a version. So technically speaking, we have options to say that this manifest is supported in registry version 2.0, 3.0. I don't want to kind of take away from the proposal that Josh has, which is there are some changes, which is the media type that was called out, but we can fix that. The fact that the reference element is added does not break image spec. It might be a registry specification change, and that's an option we can discuss going forward when we try to take things forward, right? So can we, when we fill the rubric, I think it'll be more clear as to what are the things that are competing here and what can be taken from this specification. The reference type does look appealing in some way. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think Brandon already called out, like adding a field to the manifest does make a lot of difference. So maybe we could take this part of the proposal B as well. But the versioning aspect, I would recommend we should look at both sides, like maybe distribution is what we need to version, not the image manifest itself. And that's one option we haven't spoken about yet. I want to hear what other people think on the call as to, is that something we can do? Because we are changing the registry API. We are adding something. So there's got to be some indication that the registry is supporting something new as well. but we never look at the registry distribution version here, which is something we should look at as well. And that's been one of the challenges we've faced, being able to split distribution and image spec both as a storage and a delivery mechanism here, right?
I think that's a fantastic point. If I understand correctly, you're saying with this proposal, image spec requires no version bump if we trust this ignoring fields thing.
Correct.
But distribution would need a 1.1 or 2.0, and we would need a way to know. And I don't know what that way is. Is it the conformance page? I don't know.
Those are options. Ignoring the media type mismatch here, I think that's something we can fix. And specifying how this is a specific type, that's another area that we need to fix in the rubric that might conflict. But you might not be hitting the version issue specifically, is what I'm thinking. Again, from a proposal standpoint, this is where it is what we're understanding, right? So is there anything more that we need to discuss on this proposal, or besides versioning and the fact of the artifact type not being discussed? I think pagination is the other problem that is ambiguous in this one, right?
Yeah, and I would say it's just not part of the proposal. I do think we have to fix whatever we decide to do with the media types, but I think filtering and pagination are just simply not part of the proposal, and it's something that we can take from A or C with our final kind of recommendations.
That's,
But yeah, I'm happy
pagination
to-
doesn't work with index. Like we've got it, if it's a valid index, there is no paging because an index is a document.
I think we're mixing two things here. The index is the response body schema. There are headers that we can leverage for next link that can work with an index if we want to make it work. So it doesn't kind of stop the implementation from using an index as a schema type.
So each page is an index is what you're saying?
Right. And the next link,
I see. I see.
right. So there are options to do pagination even with a given schema. So that's why it's ambiguous from the specification, because it's not proposing it, but it doesn't stop pagination per se.
Yeah, to what Josh
Sure.
was saying, I really like the idea of taking the good ideas from all of these. And so don't get stuck on any one solution of, okay, we can only implement as this one solution is there. If we see some good ideas from other solutions, let's come up with the best thing. We come up with the working group result.
Yeah. I wanted just to say, are there any other topics? I'm hearing no new topics. It sounds like we've called out all the ones. Is there anybody else on the call that would like to speak up? Okay. Thank you very much, Josh, for presenting that. Really appreciate it. You'll find everything in the minutes and the notes there. Thank you very much, Brandon. Next one, we have updates for proposal D with Brandon.
Yeah, so I had a couple of them out there, a couple PRs, and so I just wanted to point those out real quick. Get my screen set up here for a quick share. And it was just to make sure that I wasn't missing anything and that we are good with doing a merge. So if we say we're good with doing a merge, that's awesome. If there are any other questions, throw them out at me. Let me get this set up so I can actually see your hands when you start raising them at me. And yeah, so this I had gone through a couple weeks ago after we went through the proposal D, and I'd made a bunch of updates over here, fixing things like using org open containers. I think I changed a couple of those references over there, documented the annotations up top that we are changing. And then I streamlined a few things. I think I took out one of the examples down below and made a few other changes. Started embedding some inline comments as well in different places. So if there are any questions on that, throw them out there. Otherwise, I think we've got enough approvals over there. We can merge this. And so I just wanted to do a last call for anybody that had questions or comments on that one. For example, I did take out option 2 from this one. This is option 2. They're all numbered 1. Option 2 did not have the hash of whatever we were talking about. And so I'm taking that out and saying everything you push must need a hash. And the thought process I had behind that was thinking that we may want to include a reference type no matter what for everything when you push it up there, even if you're the original creator of this stuff. So that it's easy to go back and look up things, especially if you upload an index and you want to be able to pull that. If you pull by digest, you want to be able to go back and find by that hash the reference types on that image or on that index. So a few changes in there. I think it was all mostly all covered by what we talked about. So if there are any other comments on that one, throw them up in that PR. So that was one of them. The other one out there, the image layout requirement, I had the other PR sitting out there. So that one, make sure I got all these things. I had one that didn't make the cut earlier. And so I was throwing into our requirements list. And so this will be one more item in there, which was that I wanted to support the image layout, the file system format. So in case you're not familiar with that, image spec itself has, this is the file system layout when you pull these things on disk, where it says you need a blobs directory, an OCI layout file, an index JSON file, exactly what goes in them. There is a, somewhere in here, they specify exactly what the annotation is that needs to go on this. Few other details in there about what it's supposed to look like. And so this is the file system format that if you export an image locally, you want to sneakernet it across into an air gap network, something like that. This is the path that a lot of people are going through. And so I just want to document that if you sneakernet an image across, it would be nice to be able to also sneakernet all the references to that image across as well. So that was where I was looking for the backwards compatibility support for this one feature. And so I had an extra item in there. So I think that's another one of those where I've got enough approvals on there. We can merge it, but I just want to throw it up there as a last call. Anybody has questions on that, speak up now or forever hold your peace. Questions, comments on those two? I know I kind of threw them up there really quick.
Thank you for adding it.
Yep. Awesome. So other than those two, I mentioned mine were going to be really quick. And so that's why I was telling Josh, take all the time you want. Last week, we were talking about the discussion of whether or not we had this looping case in here. And just a quick reminder, you got a tag, you got an index that points to a list of images for platform-specific images. They point to blobs. We can put an artifact that points up to an image. We can put an artifact that even points up to an index. But what the artifact itself points to is important in terms of what are its children. And can an artifact itself contain manifest, or can it only contain blobs as its forward references, not the thing that it refers to backwards, but the thing that the artifact is made up of itself. And OCI said, please don't break our registries. Make sure that artifacts can only point to blobs if they're going to have a reference coming out of them. So that was where my comment to you, Josh, was saying artifact itself cannot be an index, because then it could point back to the manifest and also forward point to the manifest. And then you get this funny loop with garbage collectors. And that's not just us. This was Justin when he came with this universal proposal for everything. He pulled it because of this issue. Nisha and I are probably going to have a conversation when she's feeling better about what can be done about the node proposal that she's got, because I think the same issue is over there. So it's part of a challenge whenever we're trying to have this case where we want to say if an artifact points to an image that we don't delete an untagged artifact. And so because of that, it just complicates this whole picture. And so the feedback from OCI was, yeah, we agree that's a good idea over there. And so don't break registries, don't make loops. Loops are bad. Any questions over there? I know I kind of flew through that real quick, but we've talked about this last week and talked about a whole bunch already. And so I figure a lot of us are already pretty familiar with it.
Thanks for taking the lead. I think this is a fairly complex topic, and I'm glad somebody's drawn something.
Yeah, it's not the first time I made this picture. We've gone over this one for a while, and I think it was just since we were coming back up with the working group, a lot of people that hadn't seen it or remembered it from way back in the day might have forgotten about it. So it is a good one we don't want to break. So that
I'm
is all.
wondering how you refer to it. I feel like the terminology is not indicative, and I come from networking, so I'm like, is this reverse path forwarding or is it split horizon? It's like, how are you sure you're not routing back over a loop? So I don't know the terminology, but I'm just trying to think about, what you're describing. What is the generic terminology for that concept? And it's some kind of loop detection, right?
It is. The best way I've thought about to frame it is take whatever your artifact is that has a reference type on it, ignore the reference type for now, draw a tree of everything you've got that's built off of it, and then make sure that it's not possible for whatever that reference type is to point to any object in that tree.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best description I can come up for it. If there are better ways of phrasing it, by all means, throw them out there, because I've confused a lot of people with this.
Yeah. And it's one of those concepts that's innate into any tree and looping. It's just like, what is the terminology that people cling to so that they can associate it with what you're trying to describe here, rather than thinking about it like some net new topic that this is like a common thing. I don't know the terminology. I was just racking my own brain.
That's where I try to capture it, because and I had the same conversation with Justin actually around the Merkle tree concept, is they're all based on a downward dependency graph. And what we're doing here is we're creating an inverse dependency graph as well at the same time. And there's an intersection of both. The way we've been able to mitigate, and that's extremely powerful, because now I can add things to a registry that say they extend information to existing objects, but those existing objects don't know about them. So we're not changing their Merkle tree. We're just saying, here's some additional information that are independently verifiable. I think where we came was an interesting conversation in the OCI call, I guess a week or two ago, was as long as we maintain two different document types, index and artifact or image, whatever, basically a single object and a collection of objects, that as long as you're putting the backwards pointer on the individual object, we're fine. Like, we won't get into cycles. So it's what's interesting about that is Justin tried with his PR37 to try to create one manifest to rule them all. We considered doing that with the artifact manifest by making blobs descriptors. That was Derek's, an idea Derek had. And the more we explored it, we still couldn't solve that problem. So I think what we're coming back to is saying two manifests, individuals and a collection. And the collection is a collection of individuals. And as long as you maintain that, you could have downward Merkle trees and upward pointers, and you don't get into the cycles problem. And we haven't found a scenario that requires anything more than that anyway. So if there is a scenario, great, but should we throw technology at something we haven't found a problem for?
Yeah, I think to kind of throw this in a picture here, the solution we came up with is to say the artifact itself, whatever has that reference type, it's going to have a lower kind of object type under it, which in this case is blobs. And you can never point to that lower object type with your forward reference, and therefore your backwards reference can never point to this. So that's the way we've gotten around it, is just like Steve's saying, we've divided what this can point to is only these things at a downward level. And that way, since the reference can only point to the upper level, you can never get into that case.
Yeah. And then making sure that's codified in the spec as to what the accepted values are.
Yeah.
So you don't end up in this
and
reverse shadow Merkle.
And because the artifact, the references that we're defining with our reference type is a manifest, I think in every solution we talked about, we still allow to point up to an index. We're still allowed to point to any of these individual images. It's just that the artifact itself can only contain these blobs, and therefore you can't ever get in this scenario. And so we avoid that just by that design.
The individual manifest can point to blobs. The index can't. Air quoting can't, because we have the buildex scenario, which kind of violated that concept, and we got into the debate of the definition of a manifest as somehow a descriptor. But as long as you
that doesn't break
that
this
isolation.
Even the buildex screwing their stuff up, that just means an index points to blobs, but it's still the artifact itself can't point back to that. It's
I
the
suppose
fact that
that
the,
actually, that's true.
it's
but
the
if you
fact
put
that
a-
the outward pointer, the reverse pointer from the artifact can only point to manifest, and a manifest is always a layer above blobs.
Yeah.
That,
It's
that's
when
how
you
it
put
comes.
when you put a reference on a blob, it gets really confusing. Now everything in this chart points to everything. And
Okay, you're starting to get to the architect in the matrix. Vis-a-vis, you know, I'm starting to lose what's life. I need to spin a top on a table before I go to sleep now. Is there anything else? You're starting to twist my mind in circles. I need to go see Leonardo DiCaprio and
watch them drown.
yeah, blow up a fruit stand or something. I don't know what they were doing. What level of dream am I in? Anyway, anything else? Let's wrap up. I think now we're going to be doing proposal ads. Is that correct? So I'll add that to the next week.
I think
Not
you're
sure which
breaking
is
up.
saying- Yeah, okay, it is Lockie. Sorry, Lockie, you
saying
lost all
A
the
next?
on us.
Was he saying A next week?
I think A next week sounds like a good plan.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm hopeful we can get that review in by end of week if the team has bandwidth. And then yeah.
I think the question is what, do we pull all the details out that we wind up asking, or do we leave the details in so we could ask the next level of details? Because I can pull all the details out, and then every time a question comes up, I can just paste that in the description, or we can just leave it in and then figure out what's the next round of questions.
You've already got a specification though, right? You've got this from where you've done it for ORAS, where you've said, here's our full specification for how all this works, correct?
I did, but I did pull out information that I didn't think was relevant here. Like, for instance, it doesn't say ORAS, it says OCI because the assumption is a
Yeah.
merger. There was a bunch of details that we also pulled out to streamline it. It was actually a subset. And the information that was kept.
It doesn't deviate though?
No, it doesn't deviate. The deviation is it's OCI versus ORAS. Everything else is the same.
Yeah.
And the whole idea is that all the questions that we're going through here are questions that we've lived in real life as we've been implementing it. So I literally just kept the answers, and even some of the design on sorting has been the most recent, issues that come out of this. Because the whole idea is that's great that we go merge some simplistic version of it. Are we going to run into these anyway? So then we just kick the can down the road 6 years, 6 months. So we're just saying, here's what we've found. Here is the implementation in as minimalistic format as can be in that document.
I would be tempted to go with the original idea that Josh had, which was keep it real simple. Here's the data types and whatnot, but put up top in your list of references in that table. We've gone through the full specification over here in ORAS. If anybody wants to dig deeper, look over here. And that way we haven't lost all the data you've got, because I think it's all come from another place. But anybody comparing solution A, B, C, and D has kind of a consistent thing they're looking at as they go across.
I will say
the other ones, you're basically having to read the notes to understand the answers to all those questions. We're here, we've just put it in line.
I agree with Brandon, but at the same time, I will click the green approve button if it matches the format. So I think it's up to you to make the call. I think just having the headers in the right place, I'm not gonna not merge it. So that's an opinion.
With the number of pound signs, the number of the heading level is because I kept your template.
Yeah, there was just a few things. The biggest one I found is the very top. It's a small description, and then also that's supposed to go in the table on the README.
Yeah, I put a little TOC after it, the bulleted list after it. Is that what you're talking about? There is a description you copy paste into the README.
I don't have it up right now.
Okay, I'll go back and look at your notes.
You can, if you want to direct message me, it's fine.
Okay.
Cool.
Thanks,
well, we've lost our meeting lead, so our time is up, unfortunately. Till next week.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.